Good morning, everyone. How are we today? Here for another round of Astro-Babble. Thank you, everybody who continues to support the live streams. I very, very much appreciate it. Happy Monday. Happy Monday to everybody who's jumping on. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the program, we are going to feature 8 charts that have been donated by you, our lovely, lovely followers. Good morning, everybody who's jumping on. And of those 8 charts, I've run them through my my SolarFire Astro software, and haven't looked at them beforehand. We're just going to see what we see, talk about the planets, get some astro knowledge kind of flowing, give you some tidbits. Happy Monday, everybody jumping on, and we are going to just do it that way. If you would like to be a part of the live streams, if you would like to be in the queue, just send over your birth date, place, and exact birth time via private message only. Do not comment on the posts, and we will add you to the queue. So yeah, let's pop open a fizzy water and get started, shall we? Okay. Our first chart is actually going to be a redo. And Jane Angelique from Instagram, unfortunately, one of the things that happens because I'm typing things in and I'm sometimes copy pasting, sometimes like on Instagram I can't copy paste onto my laptop where my SolarFire software is. Unfortunately, I don't get the times right all the time. So we have Jane Angelique's chart, who we had to redo, born 3:07 p.m. in Detroit, Michigan. That is the new chart, which puts and things like that are really, really important in astrology. And I did a story in a TikTok video about birth time, and it's definitely one of my pet peeves when either I get the time wrong, the client gets the time wrong. We're only human, but in the same notion, like, time is so important in astrology, and if the time is wrong, then the birth chart's wrong. So a lot of clients I've seen where it's like, well, my reading wasn't as accurate. I'm like, are you sure about the birth time? And we go and we find out that the birth time isn't exact or needs to be rectified. So 3:07 p.m. in Detroit. Let's take a look at this chart. So we have a Virgo ascendant. That Virgo ascendant at 19 degrees is being ruled by Mercury and Aries in the 8th house of death, taxes, estates, and business. This immediately puts a lot of emphasis on the 8th house because the Lord of the chart is in the 8th. So the topics of death, the topics of taxes, estates, other people's money, business, very, very strong in the chart, especially with that Mercury in Aries. Mercury is a fun planet when we look at some of the significations, especially today, because we have the moon making an aspect to Mercury in Gemini, his home sign. That Mercury in Gemini, very, very prominent in Jane Angelique's chart, not just as the ruler, especially in the 8th, because Mercury rules the 3 M's, the topic of money, medicine, and magic. And that's definitely something that we see in the 8th house, especially from a financial standpoint, that monetary and commerce aspect of Mercury and Aries being very, very strong in the chart. That Mercury is also ruling all of these 10th house placements. So we have Venus and Mars, both in Gemini, the MC in Gemini, and Saturn in Gemini, all in the 10th house of success. So there's a big entrepreneurial push in Jane's chart. There's a lot of power to be had. However, there is a stipulation to that power because we have Pluto retrograde at 29 degrees Virgo in the 1st house of self. So this immediately tells me, first and foremost, that a lot of Jane's innate talent, her visceral power, her ability to enact who she is in the world, isn't going to be fully available until halfway through the life. And, some people peak very early on in life. In Jane's case, she's going to peak halfway through the life and finally get to play on the field at full capacity. So I think that that's something just to be aware of. Anybody with Pluto in that 1st house is going to have a time delay to their potential, and there's going to be an interesting dynamic as maturity happens, that there's a halfway through the life kind of checkpoint where now Jane has the skills, now she has the ability to take hold of all of these placements in her 8th and 10th house and really wring them dry for all they're worth. We do have the Sun in Taurus. in the ninth house. So there's a very nice presence when it comes to travel and higher education and foreigners and spirituality. There's a good ego development potential here. There's a very good stage presence as well. That tends to happen in the ninth house, especially when the ninth house is being supported by this Venus in Gemini in the 10th. There's so much that she's able to convey verbally when she's actually in the spotlight. There's just a sense of knowing, a sense of deeper wisdom, a sense of just comfortableness with her realm of knowledge and culture and all of these different aspects, the studied aspects that we see with a Virgo ascendant. We do have a full moon in the chart. The full moon is in Scorpio, but the full moon is in the third house of writing, teaching, communication. So there is this, again, there's just so many markers as we go down the chart. The idea of stage presence, the idea of being able to teach, being able to speak, being able to convey emotion, especially a full moon in Scorpio in the third house of writing, teaching, communication. That's somebody who can really get to the heart of the matter verbally, who can really instruct people on the deepest levels of who they are and make massive amount of impact with very little effort, because they naturally just carry this emotional weight to them when they speak. And I think that definitely complements all of the Mercury Gemini and the kind of stellium with the MC in the 10th of success. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful way for Jane to express a lot of who she is as a person. Finances are a little bit unpredictable, but they are blessed by Venus. So earning potential is good, but money tends to not stick around. It tends to be dramatically funneled in one way or another. Uranus being in the second house of finance, not necessarily stable for finances. We need to watch those potentially get another CPA involved, especially with that 8th house topic. You know, you're used to dealing with other people's money on a regular basis, but who deals with yours? Like, we need somebody else to touch your personal finance because of that Uranus placement. See, we have North Node and Jupiter in Capricorn retrograde in the 5th. Children are going to be difficult, but it is something that you will need to learn how to deal with. I think part of it is, you know, from a family dynamic perspective, you have this toxic escapism that was taught to you in the 4th house of family with this Neptune and Sag retrograde. But you know, part of your mission with this North Node in Capricorn in the 5th house of children is to overcome what you've experienced as a child through rearing a child of your own. It doesn't necessarily need to be your own child, especially because that Jupiter is ruling the 7th house of relationships. It could be an inherited child, but those children are not only going to be very difficult because Jupiter is in complete detriment here, but that child, those children are going to be very, very much your teachers. And in fact, the way that they behave will teach you a lot about your personal destiny, who you are, and what you need to be striving towards. Because I think a lot of your fame placements and a lot of your good with other people placements kind of crumble in the face of children, because children really don't play by the rules of people. They have their own set of unformed creativity that you don't necessarily know how to deal with. Like, you know how to deal with rules and regulations and contracts and speaking to people who can understand you. But what happens when you enter a room with somebody who can't understand you? And I think that children would definitely be one of those ways that you access a lot of the life lessons in your chart if you're looking for some extra karma points, for sure. Yeah, cool. So that's a good summary of your chart. Thank you so much for letting me take a second crack at it. Jane, I appreciate you very much. Good morning, Michelle, Albert, Jackie, David, Lucia, Heather, everybody who's jumping on Instagram, Cecilia, Celestial Melody, Jane, everybody who's watching. I appreciate you very, very much. We are on chart number 2. Let's talk about Joe. So Joe was born at 10:50 a.m. in Manchester. We've got some toxic stuff in the personality that we need to work through, Joe. Let me talk to you about this for 2 seconds, because we've got some hardball that you've decided to play with yourself, for sure. You've got this Leo ascendant, which in and of itself would be beautiful because the sun is ruling that Leo ascendant from the 10th house of success. Very, very personable, very much somebody who's supposed to be in the spotlight. However, the vices in your chart are something that I need to be very, very crystal clear with you on. So I'm going to do my best to explain them in the best way possible. First, we have Saturn in Leo, just a couple degrees away from the ascendant. And that Saturn in Leo being so close to the ascendant brings a crippling sense of self-doubt, brings, even though it is in Leo, a sign of drama, it really sours the ego and makes you kind of half a lion, is a good way to say it. And that Saturn is something that, especially in early years, would have made you teased, would have made you picked on, would have made you feel much, 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 much lesser than you actually are. Self-esteem, normally, because the ruler of the chart is so dignified, I would say self-esteem isn't a problem because it's so highly placed in the chart. But you've enclosed your ascendant with Saturn, but also Pluto in Leo, all within a good 10-degree spot. On either side. Pluto being a planet that is known for its toxicity, that is known for, especially in early years before it ripens halfway through the life, it starts to bring a lot of subconscious poison. It starts to bring a lot of just really harsh aspects into the self and into the personality. Now, when you hit 30, yeah, a lot of those things are going to be mitigated because you'll have your first Saturn return. There will be a sense of identity that you'll be able to claim, and everything will start to mature. Yeah. Then at 50, when that Pluto matures and you really start to understand, hey, I really could give two shits. Like, it's my life, not everybody else's. I'm going to do what I want. And then that second maturation of Saturn around 59, 60, with the second Saturn return, that's when you're going to truly understand who you are as a person and what you're meant to be doing. But in the short term, there's going to be these outer planets that really bring a sense of despair, would be a good way to say it, that you just can't shake a shadow, that honestly you shouldn't shake, because in that shadow lies your potential. Yeah, it's not something that you need to get rid of, it's something that you need to kind of dive into and understand. So that's something to be aware of. And I think it's one of those things where you have such a prominent sun ruling the chart from the 10th in Taurus, with Mercury very close by. Like, you have this ego that just makes people comfortable. You have a presence about you that really just walks into a room and puts everybody at ease. But this personality, this side of you that has all of this Leo, all of this Saturn, all of this Pluto, really brings a level of unknown, of inability to tap into the fullness and the richness of your personality until later in life, which will make you feel uncomfortable, will also make other people feel uncomfortable. Like, yeah, wow, on the surface there's this radiance to Joe, but underneath there's like this poison that needs to be transmuted into medicine, which will eventually happen, but it is something that needs to be practiced. It is something that needs to be observed throughout the life. We do have second house of finance being ruled by Mercury in Taurus in the 10th. I think money is definitely not something that you'll necessarily need to worry about. Financially, that's a pretty stellar financial placement, especially with Mercury in Taurus. Mercury in Taurus is something that I like to see with money because it's a level-headedness, it's a stubbornness, it's a saving. Although Joe is prone to throwing the elegant banquet, spending money on things that are lavish and showboaty. Yeah, there is also this frugalness, this saving side to Joe's chart as well. Yeah, Jupiter and Scorpio retrograde in the 4th. Honey, you were dealt cards in life that really molded who you are as a person, especially because this 4th house is connected to the 9th via Mars and Aries. Wouldn't surprise me if military was involved in the family. Wouldn't surprise me if travel, foreigners, parents marrying in who were foreign or out of the country, if that was part of the dynamic. With the family, the idea of movement or long distance travel. But the 4th house, especially having this toxic Jupiter, this Jupiter in Scorpio retrograde, it's kind of like a kraken, a leviathan, in the 4th house of family that I think was really, really difficult for you to understand growing up, which formed a lot of these personality traits. but you know, now you get a chance to recover from those. Now you get a chance to really choose to shine, as opposed to being trapped. I do think that you need to understand, you know, you're not, it might be tempting, especially with the first few major relationships, to marry your parent from that perspective, or start a relationship with somebody who you think fits that authority figure that you've been molded to expect. Not necessarily the case, not something that is good for your emotional sense of well-being. But I think that you'll understand that, and as that Saturn starts to ripen, you might let go of that first marriage and actually move into a place where you understand, like, this is more about me than it is about my family. Like, I don't need to marry to carry out a lineage. I don't need to perpetuate the same patterns. You know, what I like most about your chart, though, is that it's so growth oriented. It's so spectacular when it comes to just understanding what it means to mature over time. And I really like these placements for sure. Learning how to be friendly. You know, with this North Node in Gemini, Uranus in Gemini, you tend to associate with really fun and zany and wacky and all over the place people. Friends are notoriously unpredictable in your chart, but it wouldn't surprise me if you surrounded yourself with friends in very high places, specifically those in show business, with that Mercury and Taurus ruling the North Node and Uranus in the 11th. And that's because you travel. That's because you have this foreign edge that people are just really attracted to. We just need to be a little bit careful about how you use that. And there are other things in the chart, but I think that's pretty much the baseline of what Joe's dealing with. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate you submitting your chart. Good morning, Sandy. Good morning, Heather. Good morning, everybody who's jumping on. I appreciate you. As Leslie Jordan would say, my fellow hunker-downers. Let's move on to Alexa. So Alexa was born 2:33 a.m. in Denver. Let's take a peek at Alexa's chart. Cancer ascendant, South Node on the ascendant. Sun in Leo, Jupiter Leo in the second. That's fun. Moon in the fourth. Ruling. Yeah, okay. I see it. So Alexa, one of the things that we need to understand about your chart is you have this Cancer ascendant. And although you've been told that you're a Leo your whole life, I'm about to blow your mind. It turns out that you actually have a lot of Cancer in you. Not Cancer the disease, don't panic. But Cancer the sign, which is a natural empathic sign. It's a naturally emotional sign. It's a naturally sensitive and motherly energy that you tend to convey. And a lot of times people look at Leo and they're like, oh, well, Leo is dramatic and Leo is flamboyant and Leo is very charismatic and engaging, but you have this sensitive side more so than other Leos, which is what makes you different. You also have this South Node right on the first house placement. That South Node really talks about, unfortunately, I think a lot of your empathy draining you, a lot of the emotionalness that this Cancer ascendant would bring forward really just sucks the life out of you. And we need to learn a little bit better boundaries. We need to understand how to manage your time, your resources a little bit more wisely. Yeah, because there are a lot of time and resources to manage. The ruler of your chart is the moon in Aquarius in the fourth, or moon in Libra in the fourth. I'm sorry. Moon in Libra in the fourth is ruling the ascendant is somebody who tends to recharge in the family dynamic, especially with Venus. Oh, well, that's not necessarily a good Venus. I mean, well, here's the deal. So a moon in Libra in the fourth is a good placement. Like, there was love in the family dynamic. There was a lot of empathy. There was a lot of emotional security. There was a lot of the beautiful things that Libra brings to the surface. And it also means, because the moon is ruling your chart, that you recharge at home emotionally. So your home environment is going to be very specific to you, very important for you to understand that vacationing is not what you need. You don't need to leave your home. You actually need to, like, curl up in a ball on the couch and surround yourself with, like, art and fine wine and artisanal cheese and all the Venusian things to kind of bring yourself back into that state of self-awareness. But we have this Venus in Virgo retrograde, and we have Mercury in Virgo retrograde and Mars in Virgo in this third house, with Venus ruling your fourth house of family. I think that, you know, you were born into a family of people who write, teach, and speak, and that gave you an interesting framework that wasn't necessarily super duper helpful. I mean, it was loving and it was nurturing, but Venus in Virgo retrograde ruling the fourth from the third is somebody who's a little bit too strict, a little bit too professional, a little bit devoid of their own sense of self. You know, Venus in Virgo retrograde is the most detriment that we could see in a planet, and that being in your chart ruling your fourth house of family does bring tension into the family dynamic, especially with Mercury in Virgo retrograde here as well, conjoining the Venus. Like, the way that words were used in your family might have been very, very toxic. There might have been some lying, but overall, like, you know that they were coming from a good place. There's this moon in Libra that I keep coming back to in the fourth, where, you know, you're recharging at home. Home is a sacred space. It always has been, always will be. But the intricacies of those dynamics, especially when it comes to relatives, siblings, things of that nature that the third house represents, there's some backwardsness that we might need to unpack one-on-one. Let's see, we have North Node in the 7th, as well as Neptune retrograde in Capricorn, Uranus retrograde in Capricorn in the 7th. One thing that your spouse is going to focus on very, very heavily is the idea of control. Especially controlling the unpredictable. So there might be, and it might be something that you're actually really attracted to, is just the idea of somebody who has like OCD, somebody who's constantly trying to control the things that seem out of control, somebody who's constantly trying to, engage in spiritual development, but in a structured way. Somebody who's constantly trying to create controlled chaos, an inventor, an experimenter, but also somebody who plays by the rules a little bit more than they actually should. But because the North Node is in the 7th, like, one of your major goals in life is to actually master the relationship dynamic, to actually be with somebody in a way that is a successful, quote unquote, successful relationship. There are so many definitions of that. We can't go into that, but that's what you've decided to kind of label your 7th house with. We do have the Saturn in Aquarius retrograde from the 8th, ruling the 7th. On the lower end of the spectrum, again, every planet has higher and lower ends. Every placement has higher and lower octaves that could potentially occur, because the 8th house is the 8th house of death, ruling the 7th house of relationships, the idea of early relationships specifically passing away. That's definitely something that could occur in a very real way. But that Saturn in Aquarius retrograde ruling the 7th could also be a spouse who's a business person who deals with estates and taxes and finance, and maybe works in the field of death or estates, or something that's connected to other people passing, where financial resources need to be allocated or moved around based on that death. We do have 5th house of children, having Pluto and Scorpio, a rather toxic placement to put in the 5th house, ruled by the 3rd. What do I think about that? I think one of the most transformative experiences in your life would be having children, should you choose to go that way. But having children later in life, because of Pluto's maturation content, I think that that's definitely possible. But it's connected to Mars in the 3rd house in Virgo. I'm going to need to think on that. There are no real interpretations that are coming up to my head with that placement. But specifically because of where you're going with the relationship stuff, because of your Cancer tendency, because of your Sun and Jupiter both in Leo in the 2nd house, ruling the 6th house in Sag, I think that money is something that you'll need to understand, and having a spouse in the financial realms to coach you on that, but also you working in finance as well because of that 2nd house connected to the 6th house of work. I think that's a possibility. Awesome. Thank you, Alexa. I appreciate you and your chart very much. We've got chart number 4. Let's talk about Jackie. So Jackie was born 5:30 a.m. in London, And we've got a Aquarius ascendant with the moon in Aquarius in the first. That's fun. So here's the scoop, Jackie. You've got this sun in Aries in the third house of writing, teaching, communication, with Mars and Saturn and the North Node in Aries, all in that same house. So like the idea of you being a writer, you being a teacher, you being somebody who communicates for a living, definitely something like you've put so many eggs in that basket. It's absolutely ridiculous. Like you've chosen specifically to do this third house thing where you're working with all third house topics, including siblings, including neighbors, but just you're so active in that house. It's ridiculous. You have the ruler of your chart there being Saturn. Mars is in Aries, his proper sign, also in the third house. North Node is here, Sun is here. Saturn is also out of combustion. Like you've done so much bricklaying to get this foundation in the third. Like if you're not in a writing, teaching, or speaking profession, I would highly suggest that you turn gears immediately, especially with this moon ruling the sixth house. Like one of the ways that you do your work is through your personality. Highly identifying with the idea of work, of health and pets. That sixth house topic, like workaholic tendencies, third house, writing, teaching, communication. There's so much here to unpack. But it's just that idea that the third house, you can't escape it. It's all about your writing, teaching, speaking career, as it were. And in fact, you'd be very well known for it. But you'd be well known for talking about things that are a little bit more mysterious, a little bit more toxic potentially, because this Neptune in Scorpio retrograde up in the 10th house of success, being ruled by this Mars and Aries in the third, there's this sense of you talking about things that are naturally uncomfortable, but because of all this Aries energy in the third ruling the chart, I think that there's a leadership quality, there's a bulldozing quality that you have where you're just like, we're moving forward whether you like it or not, that I think that no-nonsense approach is actually really, really helpful to talk about things that other people wouldn't want to talk about. Interesting that you've chosen a spouse that would also be in that same profession because of Jupiter and Leo retrograde being ruled by the Sun in Aries from the third. Yeah. So having a spouse who's actually also in the writing, teaching, communication field, it just like, because it takes up so much of your life, like there's no way that you would have a spouse that would do anything other than that. This moon, and this is what I kind of wanted to go, like you're a super Aries, honey, like you've got so much Aries energy in your chart, so much of that cardinal fire, so much of that leadership quality, that initiatory quality, not necessarily somebody who finishes, but somebody who leads and paves the way and breaks through. But you have this double Aquarius energy that I want to kind of educate you on. So the moon in Aquarius and the ascendant in Aquarius are two very personal markers that we need to respect and understand. Whereas Aries charges forward without a second thought. Aquarius is this air sign that's actually hyper-focused and intelligent. It's also a sign that tends to withdraw, tends to take the higher ground, tends to rise above, tends to look at things from a forest view as opposed to a tree view, whereas Aries only sees the tree. So you have this kind of, not bipolar clinically, but this two-sided piece of your personality where they complement each other for sure, but respect that there are times where you will need to isolate in order to emotionally recharge. There are times where you will need to kind of use this Aquarian hyper focus in order to analyze and scientifically dissect a situation, as opposed to using the brunt force of your Aries placements to kind of barrel through and just kind of bull in a china shop it, which is a valid strategy. Like the more you shake things up, the more you just kind of get things broken up, the easier it is to determine what's valuable and what's not. But there is a downside to that strategy as well. Interesting, because we've got financial placements that indicate that your spouse, this Jupiter and Leo retrograde, in the 7th is going to give you a large amount of financial resource, and that's where a lot of your finances are going to come throughout the life, is via your relationships. But you also have Venus and Pisces in the second and Mercury and Pisces in the second. Like, you're good with money, but not good with money. Venus and Pisces is a very abundant sign, a very sharing sign. It allows money to flow very, very easily because Venus and Pisces kind of greases the wheels for prosperity, as well as Jupiter ruling your financial house. Like, that's always great. But we have this Mercury in Pisces, like the idea of you look at a bill twice, but somehow you always end up overpaying or underpaying. Just that Mercury in Pisces tends to muddy the mind, confuse the senses, and give you a misguided mental focus when it comes to finance. MC and Sag in the MC and Sag in the 11th. That's fun. So a lot of your partner's friends will actually be your friends as well. In fact, that's one of the side effects of being a workaholic, Jackie, as I'm sure you know, with all these Aries placements that just want to go, is you have zero time for friends. And so when you spend time with your spouse is going to be a lot more personable, a lot more charismatic, a lot more people friendly. Like, you're good with people, but you're not friendly with people. And so you're going to rely on your spouse in order to socially introduce you to a lot of your tribe. And I think that that's a really cool way that you've decided to work that into your chart to kind of round it all out, because you do need social engagement. You do need to be the center of attention, not just professionally, but personally. And your partner having those charismatic placements really does open up that social side of your chart very well. But always remember that moon in Aquarius wants to retreat, so don't think that social stuff is appropriate all the time. Okay, here we go. So we're halfway through, and we're at about 30 minutes, so we'll do another 30. Yes, so if you would like to be in the queue, just send me your birth date, place, and exact birth time, and I will add you to the queue. Also, send friends, send family. I read children as well. I've gotten quite a few babies on the queue that we've read, and the mothers are always so interested to see how their child's going to pan out ahead of time. But if you do give me a chart, always do so via private message. Do not publicly post it, and always have consent. Yeah, consent is very important because we're tapping into somebody's life and we're putting it on social media. Like, please don't give me random charts of like boyfriends or girlfriends. Like, no. Ask them, get that consent, and understand that. If you would like if you would like to book a private session with me, if you would like more info on online classes, just go to ScorpioRisingAstrology.com. Okay, let's move on to chart number 5. So we have Michelle. Let's take a peek at Michelle, born at 12:01 p.m. in Dunkirk. Interesting. Interesting indeed, Michelle. Such an interesting voice you have. I'm puzzled. I'm puzzled how you choose to live your life, Michelle, because we have this very interesting dynamic in your chart, but I think it's tricky, because you've intentionally put weakness in areas and strength in others that makes it a little bit like you use your weaknesses to your advantage. So we have Saturn in Gemini in the first house, as well as the ascendant in Gemini in the first. Saturn in the first house makes the body and the self very crippled or weak for the first 16 to 30 years of life. It's not a placement that I enjoy seeing, but it is something that forges a very strong personality. This is somebody who tends to mature like fine wine, especially during that first Saturn return. When that Saturn returns to its natal Gemini, the idea of having a personality boost or understanding who Michelle is as a person, that's really when a lot of the traits of the chart get unlocked. But the ruler of the chart, ladies and gentlemen, is this Mercury in Pisces up in the 10th house of success, right? Here's where I'm going with this. Mercury doesn't like to be in Pisces. Mercury in Pisces clouds the mind. Mercury in Pisces obsesses over things that are etheric. Mercury in Pisces is notorious for being late and not time managing. and that Mercury in Pisces is also met with this Sun in Pisces ruling the third house of writing, teaching, communication from the 10th. So it's almost as if Michelle was supposed to be a voice actor where she uses funny voices or terrible voices in order to like earn a living, like random. But the idea of that third house of writing, teaching, communication getting her famous, this Sun in Pisces, but then Mercury in Pisces is here, which is one of those signs that normally represents miscommunication, somebody who doesn't communicate very well. But to be known for miscommunication, to become famous, or to revolve success around misnomers or what not to say, is a really interesting dynamic. And I think that we also have this almost grand trine with Venus in Aquarius, Ascendant in Gemini, Uranus in Libra, that really puts a lot of wind, a lot of air into Michelle's chart, where if she's not speaking, if she's not writing, if she's not teaching, then a lot of her air placements are going to get very, very cranky with her. Very cranky with her. Especially this Jupiter and Venus and Aquarius in the 9th, like the pursuit of knowledge, so important. The pursuit of things that are foreign and cultured, and travel, very, very important. But the idea also of like speaking and teaching and being vocal about what is understood and what is known, but also from a slightly backwards and playful, like Mercury in Pisces way. It's just so strange how you've decided to stack your chart, Michelle. I'd be very interested to get feedback from you. What else do we see? Oh, so spouse is fun. You chose somebody really cool. I like that. So we have Neptune in Sagittarius, which is that dreamer who's constantly fantasizing about the white picket fence, somebody who's constantly pursuing the Holy Grail, somebody who's constantly trying to live in this ideal fantasy world. And the moon is in Sagittarius here in the 7th. Like she's decided that her partner is supposed to be this King Arthur figure, and not even that, but this Jupiter in Sagittarius from the 9th is also ruling it. Like the idea of a foreign prince, very Aladdin almost would be a good way to think about it. Somebody who is constantly wishing for bigger things, dreaming big, actually gets that opportunity via the 9th house of travel, foreigners, higher education. Wouldn't surprise me if the spouse worked in one of those realms. Also somebody who's very spiritual, because of that Neptune placement, but also because linked to the 9th house of spirituality. And a lot of with those Pisces and Neptune placements in the chart, I think that spirituality is a part of the life, but definitely the spouse is one of the ways to unlock Michelle's spirituality as well. Somebody who can kind of ground her in those universal truths. It all comes back to this Mercury in Pisces, which really just muddies up communication in a way that's so strategic, but I can't necessarily see how that would work in the chart. Talk to me, Michelle. Tell me about your life. Tell me about how you've used this ability to muddy your words and cloud the mind to your advantage to get you to almost play dumb, as it were, to get this recognition, this fame of the 10th house. We have this Mars in Capricorn and this North Node in Capricorn in the 8th house, which I think is super interesting, being ruled by the 1st. Like, one of the things that you're supposed to be mastering is entrepreneurship, business, the idea of death, the idea of taxes, estates, other people's money, working in those fields, especially working in fields like hospice. Yeah, you'd be very, very good at, but also working in the health industry, working with people who are on the verge of death, working with people who you actually go to their houses, or you're actually able to use financial resource in order to make a business that revolves around the idea of health or pets or something of those 6th house topic natured things. But yes. Cool. So that's all I have to say about Michelle's chart. Thank you, Michelle, for donating your chart. I appreciate it. Let's move on to chart number 6. Tiana, I think I'm saying that. Tiana? I'm going to say Tiana. Born at 9:27 a.m. in Zamun. Let's take a quick peek. We've got a Libra ascendant, so there's the sugar-coatedness, but we have this Pluto in Libra in the first, as well as Uranus and Pluto in the first. You've put 2 very prominent outer planets in your first house of self, identifying with generational plights, especially the toxicity of different generations. Having Pluto in the first, and then having Venus rule the chart from the 12th house, as well as Mars connected to Venus, like you've surrounded yourself with death. It wouldn't surprise me if you have mediumship qualities in the chart. There's a lot of healing that needs to be done in the chart, but that's also what makes you like really good at who you are and what you do. The ruler of the chart is Venus in Virgo in the 12th, and I think one of the things that you're going to need to do throughout the life, my dear, is reclaim your femininity, reclaim your goddess energy, reclaim your ability to be abundant and to be free-flowing and to love unconditionally, as opposed to constantly putting conditions on things. One of the ways that you choose to put conditions on things, by the way, is this idea of the moon in Aries and almost conjoined Jupiter in Aries in the 7th house of relationships. Like you've decided, because you have so much personal growth and you've done so much in order to rectify your own chart, and you've strove so hard in order to do these things, like you will settle for nothing less than somebody who is on top of their game. Yeah. Which unfortunately might kind of drive home some of these self-esteem qualities that we need to work on, because you've got such a massive personality on the surface, but internally we need to do all this work on you. And all of this work with the Lord of your chart being in the 12th house of hidden enemies, like you've decided to karmically heal, but you've put so many fire placements in your chart with Moon in Leo, Mercury Leo, Moon in Aries, Jupiter Aries, that it's like, well, how am I supposed to heal if I'm right all the time? Or how am I supposed to reflect if I'm on all the time? Yeah? And I think that that's a dangerous game that you play, because especially with the love that you choose to surround yourself with in terms of an intimate relationship, you're constantly saying, well, we need to be better, we need to be bigger, we need to be stronger, we need to be faster, it needs to improve, there's no room for any slack. Yeah? And that really drives home this fundamental idea of when will enough be enough. And I think that you need to start understanding that self-love is the most important love, that there is a need for you to seriously invest in your own healing process. Retreats would be excellent for you. If you do not take retreats or strategic breaks from the world in order to recover, in order to reflect, in order to do that deeper work, they will be taken for you. Yeah, and you don't want to know how that pans out. And I think with all of this said, it's really interesting that you've put your North Node in Scorpio in the 2nd house of resources, because I think one of the things that you're struggling with is understanding how valuable you are, but the idea of value, period. You think, oh, well, if I'm just this blazing ball of fire, then everybody will love me, and I'll be able to basically burn my way through life, and everything will be fine because I'll be this pretty shining glittery disco ball, and that's all I need to do. And that's not all you need to do. Instead, there are deeper understandings of your time and your energy and what is needed versus what is wanted from other people and from yourself. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here, but I think that the clearer message as we start to work through the chart is that never take anything at face value. Yeah, because the surface can be easily manipulated. and you know how to manipulate that surface because you know how to protect those deeper, more sensitive parts of yourself, and you understand what it means to live not necessarily a lie, but to project this persona that does not match the deeper recesses of who you are as a person. Yeah. So as you start to understand how to build a little bit more integrity, a stronger foundation, get your roots set before you start to expand your branches, work with people who really understand your truest value as opposed to what you might bring to a relationship on a surface level. You know, all these things are really, really going to be important to your life journey. And I think that if we were to summarize all those up in one word or one phrase, it would be just don't focus on what's presented at the surface, because it's so much deeper than that, especially in your chart. Excellent. Thank you, everybody, for jumping on. I appreciate you. We got 2 more charts. Let's keep it rolling. So we're going to talk about Heather, my love, my darling, my Cocoa Goddess. I'm so sad that Temple Fest is going to be online this year, because I so much enjoyed our table cackle and loving over Disney that we shared in Temple Fest. So all the best love to you. Born at 10 p.m. in Port Antonio. Let's take a peek at Heather's chart. There's that Leo ascendant. There she is. Flip that hair, girl. And then Sun in Sagittarius ruling the chart from the 5th. Massive, massive amounts of creative energy, for sure. But also because the ruler of the 1st is in the 5th, we have this idea of children and parenting being very, very important to the chart. I would highly, highly recommend that you understand the importance of this. Not just birthing things that are creative, but also the idea of potentially fulfilling your ego's promise to the chart by having some sort of child or working in a parental role a little bit more often, especially when self-esteem is low. If that sun ever starts to not burn as bright and you start to get into that low self-esteem territory and you start to feel like you need deeper healing, I think one of the ways to access that would definitely be to investigate that childish energy, either through taking care of friends' children, taking care of your own, or incorporating some of that kind of buoyant, jubilant, innocent energy of the 5th house a little bit more into the life. We've got the 6th house of work that you've decided to stack with some interesting placements, honey. We've also got massive amounts of spine and joint issues in the medical aspect of the chart. Leo ruling the chart brings us into the spine, Sagittarius Sun into the hips, and then all of this Capricorn stuff. Like, you're putting so much into the joints. Like, watch out for arthritis, keep the bones moving, make sure that everything is lubricating. You should be taking supplements that are specific for the joints, for the bones, really making sure that if you're taking any supplements, that they're being bioabsorbed and integrated. Like, the joints are really where you're going to feel a lot of stuff from top of the head to the bottom of the toes. Like, just take care of the bones. But in the 6th house of work, health, pets, you also have your moon, your Venus, your south node, and your Mercury all in Capricorn. This is where you get your mental stubbornness. Yeah. This is where you get some of your innovation qualities because of Capricorn as well. But Mercury in Capricorn is going to be one of those signs that's very stubborn, that's really headstrong. It gives you a lot of really great ideas, and in fact, you are very innovative in the idea department, but Capricorn is not one of the easiest signs to mentally get along with. The South Node here in the 6th house of work, health, pets, I think this kind of doubles down on the idea of potential health issues, because the South Node is the energy suck of the chart. We really need to understand that health and wellness is something to seriously focus on, but then also the idea of what you choose to do for work. Like, a lot of your placements are in need of working smarter, not harder. Yeah, and Capricorn doesn't really understand that. Capricorn is a little bit more about must suffer to achieve. But that South Node really kind of reminds you that, hey, if something feels like it's a lot harder than it should be, 9 times out of 10 it is, and that can be corrected if we just do this thing that Capricorn hates, which is ask for help. Yeah? Yeah? Okay. So we've got this Venus in Capricorn, Moon in Capricorn as well in the 6th. Moon in Capricorn, like a lot of your work environment recharges you. Like you love to feel productive. It's something that you really enjoy doing. And also just, Venus in Capricorn takes absolutely zero shit in the workplace. But there is this idea of needing to soften the 6th house as a whole, I think. There's a little bit too much rigidness here. There's a little bit too much Capricorn. We need to soften that with some of the other placements in the chart. Specifically, back to that idea of children, we have Saturn in Scorpio in the 4th house of family, ruling that 6th house of work. And again, working with families, working with children, potentially being a nanny would be very, very good for you, because again, like you're in the home environment, you're working with children, you have a great work ethic, but it also gives you that solar and lunar recharge that your chart kind of craves so much, in order to make sure that you don't turn into that grouchy Capricorn aesthetic at work. MC in Taurus making a square from the 10th to the 1st. Yeah, there's this idea of fame that I think you struggle with personality-wise. Like, you'd be so good at what you do if you'd only let yourself do it. Yeah? Simultaneously wanting to do the work and put the work in and be recognized for the work, but also your personality cringes at the idea of being in the spotlight. That's something to rectify for sure. But I think, again, if you were to work with children, like the children can be in the spotlight, and you can be the supportive mom on the side as they start to ascend to their level of fame. I think that would be fun. Mars and Aquarius in the 7th. Interesting relationship dynamic. Somebody who's very heated, very aggressive, very competitive, but also has this like super intelligent side. Yeah, you want somebody who's built. You want somebody who has some muscles, because Mars rules that athletic activity. Very, very important to you. But also Aquarius is the sign of the genius. It's somebody who has this supreme mental faculty, is a good way to say it. And of course, because Saturn and Scorpio is in mutual reception with the 7th, the idea of you potentially inheriting kids or having kids with your spouses is of utmost priority. If they don't want kids, toss them aside, girlfriend. That's just not something that you want to trifle with in your chart, because of that connection between the 4th and the 7th. Yeah, I think that's pretty much about it. Oh no, we need to talk about the North Node and the 12th with karmic healing. This Moon in Capricorn in the 6th, this ruling your North Node, and Venus is naturally opposing this North Node at 4 degrees in the 12th house of hidden enemies, of jails, hospitals, karmic healing, retreats. I think one of the things that you're going to need to be able to do, especially for work, is to engage in deeper healing practices, to weave in some things that you've had to master for yourself into the workplace. And I think, again, like the idea of you potentially teaching deeper karmic healing work to children, or strategies to deal with trauma. Like you're more than that nanny archetype. Like you're definitely more Mary Poppins. Like you're here for a specific purpose. Like you're here to heal. You're here to unpack. You're here to solve problems. You're here to do work that is going to resonate on all levels, not just doing a job, but to actually leave a lasting impact via that 12th house. So I think that that's something just to keep in mind. Is it's one thing to do a job, but it's another thing to do a job so well that you change somebody's life. Yeah, so always aim for that professionally. Cool. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Heather, I love all the feedback. We've got one more chart to do, and we're going to talk about Lucia. So Lucia was born 11:57 p.m. in Leominster. And we've got Capricorn on the ascendant with Saturn ruling in the chart, retrograde in Libra, conjoining Jupiter in Libra, retrograde up in the 10th. Again, the idea of a strong 10th house ruler There's this idea of fame, there's this idea of success, there's this idea of being very well known or prominent first thing in the life. I think that that's something just to be aware of. But all you really want is friends. Huh, that's interesting. You need to think about that for 2 seconds. You've got really good placement, strong planets for sure. You've got this, Lucia, you've got this Venus in Libra, Sun in Aries in its exaltation, Mars in Aries in exaltation, Saturn in Libra in its exaltation. Like, you've got so many great placements, but there's a lot of opposition happening in the chart as well that I think we need to discuss. Specifically, this MC in Scorpio opposing this Venus in Taurus in the 5th house of children. I think one of the things that you strive for is to find your tribe. Yeah, and your tribe is very dark, very spiritual, very unpredictable, very kind of fun, but also slightly haunted is a good way to think about it. And that's just who you feel comfortable with. You feel comfortable with those Scorpio energies in your 11th house, especially when they're very devoted to family and progress and moving forward in life. But also moving forward in those deeper, darker spiritual aspects of life that Scorpio tends to be very good at. But that naturally opposes this Venus and Taurus in the 5th. Like, you'd be such a good mom. Yeah, and you're such a good parent that you often have to sacrifice this social life, this ability to live on the dark side a little bit in order to fulfill what you feel is the status quo of being a mom. Chances are that your children are going to resent you anyway because you're never going to be able to do anything perfect. That's just child rearing 101. So don't be so hard on yourself. Like, live your best life, but also understand that this Venus and Taurus in the 5th house of creativity, children, parenting, like, that's a beautiful placement as well. We just need to balance your social life with your responsibilities a little bit better. Then we have all this Libra stuff making sign-based oppositions to your Sun, your Mars, and your Mercury down in the 4th house of family. Very competitive family dynamic, by the way. Very intense family dynamic, by the way. Very potentially aggressive family dynamic, by the way. You learned how to work from your family. Like, you learned how to turn the volume up to 100 and go, do not stop. And that level of intensity is very, very detrimental in the long term, just as an FYI. All of this striving that you have in the 10th house with Saturn in Libra being the ruler of the chart, Jupiter in Libra, Pluto in Libra, Moon in Libra, Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto are all retrograde. Like, there's a certain level of fame in your chart for sure, but the idea of success coming at a price, yeah? And how much of your life do you really want to build off the backs of others? How much do you really want to do something just because it's the opposite of what you learned, or because it's, in the same realm of comfort that you've been kind of exposed to your whole life? There is value in understanding, not everything has to be done by the book. Not everything has to be done completely scripted. Not everything has to be done with rules and consequences in mind. Yeah, sometimes you just need to do something for the enjoyment of it. And I think that the more I look at your chart, the more the idea of enjoyment is met with kind of self-deprecation. And no, we can't do this because we're obligated to do this. No, the rules tell us we should do this way. And I think a lot of that is family stuff, old karmic stuff, where it's like, yeah, rules were important to make sure that you didn't go jump off a cliff at any random moment. But now that you're a responsible adult and you can do adult things, there is a certain level of ease that you should expect, especially after 30, after your first Saturn return, especially with Saturn ruling the chart, that things should get easier. Yeah, you don't need to constantly be piling on all of this responsibility all of the time, especially potentially working in the family business. Sometimes it's okay to just do something for you and to not feel judgment about that, right? We do have this North Node in Leo in the 8th, and I think that this is really where we start to understand like your idea of needing to strike out on your own, to be your own individual, to find your own persona, your own voice, your own sense of self. I think that that's really where the chart is heading, is we have all of these stipulations, all of these rules, all of these dynamics where it's the coulda, shoulda, woulda, and we need to learn how to live life a little bit more on your own terms. Lucia is a good way to think about it. There's a lot that you can and will learn if you choose to veer off the garden path, is a good way to say it. And you don't necessarily feel the need to conform, and you don't feel the need to do something just because you're good at it. Yeah, but you do it for the enjoyment of it. And the more I look at your chart, the more that that's really the crux of the situation. Like, we can unpack things one-on-one, for sure, and we could talk about specific instances and put them into an astrological context, but the more I look at your chart, the more I'm like, yeah, you're way too hard on yourself. Yeah, there's so much expectation on your shoulders. Yeah, family's involved and they've been pushing you this whole time. Yeah, you need to learn how to be more independent. Yeah, you need to learn that sometimes your needs and the fun for fun's sake comes first for mental health reasons. Yeah, and that's really the crux of your chart. Excellent. Cool. So that's it. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you for jumping on. It's been another lovely hour of Astro-Babble with you. Again, if you would like to be in the queue, or if you have friends or family that would like to submit their birth information, all you need to do is private message me. Send me your birth dates, place, and exact birth time via private message, and I will add you to the queue. We will do... Unfortunately, I cannot do the Astro-Babble tomorrow because I am reopening my clinic this week, so I might be a little bit scarce. I will do it on Wednesday, but I can't do it tomorrow because I have other appointments that I need to see. So yeah, we'll manage this as everything starts to open here in Florida, and I'll do it as soon as I can. But yes, if you would like to schedule a session with me in the meantime, just go to ScorpioRisingAstrology.com, check out my online classes too, submit your name for the queue, we'll talk about it, check out my TikTok, check out Instagram, Facebook, blah, 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 wherever you're listening to. And until next time, may the stars be ever in your favor.